Welcome to Education in Focus. I'm your host, Eliana Kernodle. The Department of Education will support charter schools by withdrawing a federal award program initially issued by the Biden administration and directing over $30 million to the non-traditional public schools, the department has said. Joining me to dig into this is Chalkboard News editor Brendan Clary. Brendan, how does withdrawing a federal award program aimed at charter schools help charter schools?
In order to understand that, I think you kind of have to get a little bit into the federal grant making apparatus, right? And it's kind of a confusing swirl of terms like NIA, which just means notices inviting application. And you kind of have to get into the different charter school grant programs or different charter management organization grant programs. So there's a lot of jargon that goes into this. But essentially, if you are getting money from the federal government, there are strings attached. And so that, I think, is probably the easiest way to explain that under the Biden administration, this money was made available to charter schools, but there was some strings attached, right? So you would have these requirements and what the Trump administration called regulatory burdens, right? That would be attached to that federal money. So that's probably the easiest way to describe that without getting too into the weeds. And you can find all of the information about these programs and the specific requirements by going online, going to the Federal Register and seeing here's the application, right? So there is also an element to this too. This is the notice inviting application. You offer, you basically have to show here is where the government is inviting people to apply for these grants. So that's something when you have a federal program or even a state program, a lot of these have requirements for bids, right? So you have people and a certain amount of time that goes by and then people can apply and then the best are sort of picked and, they get the grant, right? So there's these different kinds of applications that you can apply for. And I think for most people, it's kind of that is just so kind of niche that it doesn't really have a lot of application. But I think that the big sea change here is that they're trying to make it easier for charter schools. And they're trying to remove some of that regulatory burden that they say that the Biden administration was imposing on them.
Well, and this withdrawal, are they planning on reissuing this notice inviting applications?
Yeah. So from the press release from the Department of Education, they said the withdrawn NIAs were published in the waning days of the Biden administration and included, quote, excessive regulatory burdens and promoted discriminatory practices. And that's something that the Trump administration has been using to talk about some of the DEI or different maybe critical race theory informed different kinds of decision making processes. So again, a quote, the department's revised NIAs, that's notices inviting application, will have a more streamlined application process and evaluate applicants based on alignment with President Trump's commitment to expanding high quality charter schools, reducing federal micromanagement, eliminating ideological overreach, and empowering families with greater educational choice. So they're trying to pull that, what they call excessively burdensome regulations and try to get it more in line with President Donald Trump's, goals of promoting school choice. So that's what they say they're trying to do with this. So there's a little bit of that, back and forth from administration to administration.
And at the same time, they also announced that they're directing over $30 million to a different program for charter schools. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the Department of Education said that it's also, quote, fast-tracking the release of $33 million in these charter school program grants for charter management organizations. So if you don't know anything about charter schools, there are the charter schools themselves, and then there are charter management organizations. So universities can sometimes be a chartering organization or an institution. It could be a nonprofit or some of these different kinds. There's a number of different chartering organizations that will hold a school's charter. And so it's something that a charter school is accountable to another entity outside of the charter school itself, and they will hold its charter. So the Department of Education said that it's releasing that $33 million in those grants for those charter management organizations that it says were previously stalled by the Biden administration. And it says that the grants will, quote, support the expansion of high quality educational opportunities for students and families. CSP grant recipients will be prohibited from spending any grant funds on DEI initiatives or race-based discriminatory practices. So I think if you were going to kind of put a nutshell like approach to what is happening in this action with these charter school programs, is that the Trump administration has a very clear understanding of trying to promote school choice, which is a big sea change from the Biden administration. So they're trying to get kids into charter schools. They're trying to make it easier for charter schools. They're trying to funnel that money to these charter management organizations, through this program, through these federal funds. And they're also trying to do it in a way that doesn't require any of these like equity practices or DEI. And that's, the other big sea change from the Biden administration. I think one of the first, if I remember correctly, one of the first executive orders that Biden did sign in office, was signing like a government-wide equity initiative. Like, we're going to try to prioritize this in everything. So it's in the Department of Education, it's in the roads, it's in all of the federal funding. And so we've seen the exact opposite of that so far. And, President Donald Trump doesn't seem to have many allies in the teachers unions. So it's a big kind of change from that as well, in terms of promotion of charter schools, and in saying like, we're going to try to get kids, into these kinds of charter school systems. And so, again, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Office of Communications and Outreach at the Department of Education, Maddie Biederman, she said that, quote, "The department is committed to putting students first by expanding access to high-quality educational options and ensuring that federal resources are used effectively to promote student achievement, and that they'll continue to identify and remove barriers in the way of educational innovation and excellence." So you can kind of see there have been like big changes in terms of how the Trump administration and the Department of Education are thinking about school choice, and they're thinking about some of this diversity, equity, and inclusion practices.
Well, Brendan, thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at chalkboardnews.com.